A quick word before we get into this week's episode.
I was talking to a head of school recently who said, Peter, we've got a strong strategic plan, but every time we try to act on it, things stall. If that sounds familiar, you're not alone. Big goals are easy to write down, but they often get bogged down in the daily, making it hard to stay strategic. That's why I built the school operating system. It's a framework that helps you align your team and focus your priorities so you can actually execute the plan. We work alongside you to extrapolate a one-year plan from your existing strategic plan, break it into 90-day sprints, and design a much more effective meeting rhythm that moves your team closer to your strategic vision every single day. And that's just the start. We support much more to help you build the operational infrastructure your plan needs to succeed. If you're serious about making traction this year, let's talk. Visit moonshotos.com/SOS. That's MOONSHOTOS.com/SOS to learn more and set up a time to chat about the school operating system. Hi there, my friend. I'm Peter Barron. Welcome to today's episode of the Independent School Moonshot Podcast. I love it when I have a return guest. I'm so excited to welcome Mattingly Messina back to the pod. Mattingly is the founder of Throughline, which does incredible advancement consulting and strategy work with independent schools around the country. And we had this awesome conversation earlier in the pod. You can scroll back through the archives and find it. And actually, Mattingly, I don't know if I told you this, it's one of the most downloaded pods in the history of the podcast, which is wild. Yeah, it's sacred cool. But today we're back and we're going to talk about something that's near and dear to my heart, which is strategy and implementing strategic plans. Clearly, it's something that I am very, very passionate about. But Mattingly and I were talking not long ago about the funding component of a strategic plan. And, I really appreciated Mattingly's philosophy around that. And so today he's back, share that philosophy with us. And my guess is on the other side of it, it's going to be helpful for not just me, but for you, the listener as well. So I am excited about this conversation. Mattingly Messina, welcome back to the podcast.
Thanks, my friend. I'm happy to be back. It's great.
Hey, well, I appreciate you and I appreciate you sharing your philosophy today. But before we get to that, in case somebody didn't listen to the first podcast, can you introduce yourself and Throughline?
Yeah, absolutely. I started Throughline about 3 years ago or so after having the position as an advancement director at a K through 12 independent school in the Bay Area where I live. I'm also the product of a K through 12 independent school that really did so much for me as a young person, and I feel like changed my life. And I've had the chance to serve as the Alumni Association president and now a member of the board there. What's fun for me is that I get to chair my alma mater's advancement committee, and I've gotten to see them go through their own recent strategic plan. So it's been that perspective that has helped you and me talk through all of these things. It's been really relevant with some of the clients that I've been working with as well. And I just believe that we've got to get a little bit more comfortable acknowledging that independent schools need all sorts of different funding sources in order to be successful. In the previous episode, we talked a lot about not apologizing for schools having to ask for money and raise money. And I think if you're going to do something about as bold as a strategic plan is, you also should be equally bold in figuring out how to make that a financial reality. So I'm happy to chat. I mean, you and I talk so often. It's great to press record and actually share this for other people as well. So let's do it.
Awesome. And one of the things that I really appreciate about you is your way with words. And you talked about how a strategic plan without a funding pathway is just poetry. And I'm like, oh my God, like, what does that mean? Like, I'm intrigued. I'm super intrigued. So let's do that. Like, what do you mean when you say that a strategic plan without a funding pathway or pathways is just poetry?
Yeah, I guess the irony is that phrase in and of itself is also just a little bit of poetry. But I think of it this way: strategic plans are, we spend so much time focusing on the language that winds up going into the public document. And I think that that's really important because clear language is a huge component of getting people to rally around what you want your school to be over the next decade or so. And so makes sense. You don't want a strategic plan out there with muddled language. You want it to be really clear and really crisp. However, if there isn't much beyond that language, if there's all the thought and good intention in the world, but not a plan to actually make these things come to life, all it is just sort of really nice sounding poetic language. And I've seen, and I know, Peter, you in particular have seen independent schools put so much time and effort into their strategic planning process. But once it's done and out there in the world, they've got lots of roadblocks to actually making it happen. So from your perspective and what you help schools with, it is often the execution and the implementation, how to take that work and make it part of all the other things people are doing to run a school. What I often spend time talking with school leaders about is the financial reality of making these big, ambitious goals happen and how to weave that into the advancement work that you've got to already be doing as a school year over year anyways. I think that's where schools often get tripped up. And, if they're going to be successful long-term with their big, ambitious goals, they've got to make sure that they're financially realistic as well. And they've got a plan to generate the revenue needed in order to make it happen.
Yeah, I mean, such a good point. I mean, the daily it can easily dominate the strategic. And at SAIS, I saw Brett Jacobson post this on LinkedIn. It may have been this week. They did a spot survey of their heads and trying to figure out like where are they finding where are the roadblocks for them? Where are the roadblocks for them in their schools? And like way up at the top of the list this year was juggling daily demands versus strategic work, like finding time to be strategic. And so, yes, this is a thing. It's a thing that lots of people are wrestling with, trying to figure it out, just as I'm sure it's a thing for, organizations that publish strategic plans with really clear visions and really clear goals around how do we make that vision come to life. Like the question I have then is like, at what point should what should funding pathways be woven into all that conversation? Because I know we've talked about when there's this I don't know if it's a tension, Mattingly, but like I guess the question I'm trying to articulate is like what happens when advancement is brought in after the plan versus being at the table from day one. Like, do we bake these kind of funding pathways in from day one? And maybe schools are, and I just don't know about them. I'm sure they are, but I'm just curious from your perspective, what does that look like?
Well, from my perspective, I would say I'm actually not so sure that they always are baking them in from the beginning. And I think that they should not be thinking about funding pathways in day one. I think they should be thinking about them in day two, because what I think.
What does that mean? What is day one versus day two?
If day one is let us allow ourselves to get every interesting, unique idea out there on the table. We don't want them to be inhibited by anything, no pun intended, but what are the moonshots that our school really wants to achieve? I really encourage schools to give themselves the space and the freedom to think about those things and not take something off the table because they've already determined it's not affordable, they can't raise money for it, etc. So give yourself the space to do that. Otherwise, you're not really engaging in a good strategic planning process. But shortly after that, the reality does sort of kick in. And so when you give yourself the space to originally have that ideation session, and if your school is using a strategic planning external partner, they're likely going to be very good at giving you the space and creating that room for you to have those initial conversations. But once you start narrowing down just a little bit, I do think advancement needs to come in sooner rather than later for a few reasons. One, we don't want to think of funding as the thing that might inhibit one of your strategic planning pillars from coming to life. I want schools to think of it as the opportunity to actually make these things living, breathing parts of your school. Getting your advancement folks in there early provides an opportunity. It's not closing a door. It's really more opening a door, because you get to take this idea and actually put concrete steps in place to maybe turn it into a reality. Now, whether that means your advancement director, if your school has one, is a part of that strategic planning process, I think that's one of the easiest recommendations to make. But as you're structurally putting your plan together, creating space for, whether with your advancement director, your CFO, your head, your board chair, your board finance chair, to talk about what the financial implications of each project are, to talk about what kind of money, if any, is required to make this happen, to talk about what financial trade-offs might take place if you implement it. If you don't do that toward the beginning, advancement winds up coming in at the end, feeling like they're sort of taking orders. Hey, congratulations, we put together this plan. In total, we think it might cost $10 million. Can you please go raise that for us? You're setting yourself up to really have a difficult time making that happen if that's how you do it.
Yeah, I love that perspective, and it makes a lot of sense to me. And I'm thinking about some work that I do with schools, both like one-on-one and inside of my membership. I actually just led a session on this yesterday inside of the membership around how do you validate an idea?
Yeah.
And applying a framework so that, hey, this is an idea. Like we're going to pressure test it across a number of filters to see if there's a there on the other side. And if the there is not there, it's a lot of theirs. That's okay, right? You put in an idea parking lot because you don't want to start to invest in something that ultimately you can figure out in the earlier stages if this thing is valid. Like, is it going to work? And what I'm hearing, and this is actually part of what I would say, is like, look, you've got to do the money part of it as well, not just the market analysis, the demand, like all the different things, but you have to figure out, like, is this viable financially? And now a word from our sponsor. Leading a school today can mean juggling a dozen different systems across offices, finance, fundraising, marketing, enrollment, and academics, all pulling your attention in different directions. At Blackbaud, we believe it shouldn't be that way. That's why we built Blackbaud's Total School Solution. It's a fully connected solution designed for private and independent school leaders who want a clear view of their entire operation. From tuition to transcript to donation, you get one ecosystem, one login, and one source of truth. This isn't about more software. It's about smarter strategy. When your systems work together, you spend less time chasing down data and more time leading. Want to see what Blackbaud's Total School Solution could do for your school? Visit blackbaud.com. That's BLACKBAUD.com to learn more.
Yeah. And I remember in our last conversation, we talked about the ways that, for example, board members can get involved in fundraising by seeing the different ways that it can impact the daily life of the faculty and staff and the students. I mean, I would encourage schools to think about it in a similar way here. If you've got an interesting idea in your strategic plan, whether that's something on the facility side that you're making a commitment to exploring to build a new program that might take working capital to make it happen, or maybe even just expanding something like your school's financial aid, which would really affect the way you go about budgeting process. Think about how exciting it would be to be able to go to different community members and donors and provide these very concrete things that they could potentially fundraise for. To me, this is an opportunity to use your plan to identify pockets of support in your school that otherwise don't exist. And your advancement folks are going to have the highest chance of selling that idea to families if they're involved in it early. Because if they're part of that conversation from the very beginning, they can provide guidance by saying, listen, I think that this idea is actually going to be quite appealing to our families, and here's why. Or, I think this idea is cool, but I think it's going to take multiple years to convince our families to support it. So that means, hey, CFO, we might need to provide some institutional funding for this in the budget without the expectation that we can raise money for it quite yet. It's going to take more time. And so if those conversations don't happen, you wind up just saying, oh, we got to go fundraise for this. We got to launch a capital campaign. It might not be the right kind of campaign to run. You might not be ready for it. So I want schools to think about this as an opportunity to make stuff actually come to life and use that to involve their advancement people early and often.
So I hear two things there. One is you're leaning into all of the expertise that the advancement office has accumulated over time and the deep understanding of the donor base, right? So
Yes.
leverage that talent up front. But then the other thing that I don't think you specifically stated, but came through loud and clear for me is like by adopting this approach, you're encouraging cross-functional collaboration.
Absolutely. You have to, because as we learn with the schools we work with when they do their strategic planning process, you've likely got task forces or committees that already have that good cross-functional representation. And any good strategic planning consultant will make sure that a school does that. So to me, talking about funding gives all these other folks that might not in their daily lives get to experience the financial side of the school, gives them an opportunity to learn, to weigh in, and to share expertise they may not even have know that they have had, because the advancement folks are facilitating this finance discussion from the very beginning of the strategic planning process. And so it benefits them. I think it benefits the advancement team that often feels like they're the only ones that have the expectation to go out and raise this money. We could all use help from one another. I think it just makes schools smarter and better at what they do.
And if I'm not mistaken, I'm also hearing you say, hey, this idea has legs. Like, we've done the work, we know it's there, but we may not be able to raise all the money out of the gate. We may have to set the expectation that we're going to use operating to fund some of this as like startup capital.
Yeah. And so when you think about your strategic plan and how these things come to life, what I often see are these fantastic pillars. They're broken out by either subject matter or the type of impact that they're going to have on the school community. And within that, but what the plans don't often really say is what type of financial commitment the school might need to make that happen. And there's more than one. So for example, with a facilities improvement that your plan might call for, we are going to construct a new upper school, or, my alma mater right now is in the middle of creating a student common center for dining, physical wellness, all of that. That's the type of stuff that you predominantly would go out and raise money for through a capital campaign. You'd either do 100% of the project cost through fundraising like that, or you'd mix it with fundraising and debt. And schools think very critically when it comes to facilities about what kind of debt they'll take on and the depreciation of the asset. But then if you're talking more about a programmatic investment, it might not be something you need to fundraise for. It might be something the school can phase into its operating budget over the next few years, especially if there's an FTE requirement where you've got to add more staff members. So there are a lot of different ways you go about raising money, and an overarching capital campaign is not always the answer. I have worked with schools and seen schools that often have this great strategic plan. They'll do some back of the napkin math on what these programs and new facilities might cost. They'll add it up and say, all right, we've got to go out and raise $15 million. But that is not necessarily the best, the right, the most efficient way to go and get the working capital needed to do this. And it sort of is a one-dimensional fundraising opportunity, when in reality, you could spend the next 3 to 5 years maybe with individual major gift programs or with some combination of fundraising and debt, but you don't give yourself the opportunity if you just think about the funding at the very end of the process. You're basically left with only one option, and that is to quickly go raise potentially tens of millions of dollars. Well, good luck. That's going to be very challenging, especially in this environment. And my philosophy is that schools should think about those large overarching capital campaigns a little bit differently and think about breaking them up into smaller, more subject matter focused things that can get done under a shorter time frame.
Yeah, I love that framing. And, as you're looking at this problem more holistically, and what are you seeing in terms of maybe some blind spots that strategic plans have when it comes to funding beyond what we just talked about?
One of the blind spots I see, which will not be a surprise to you, is the ease with which schools add programs, services, people, but the difficulty for schools to really scrutinize and evaluate the efficiency or the ROI of a program. Really important note, ROI does not always just mean return on your financial investment, right?
Yeah.
There is a cultural ROI that is super important to schools, mission-driven ROI, but we are not very good at A, analyzing the effectiveness of our programs, and B, sunsetting them if we choose Did you realize that they're not really serving us any longer? So
Yeah.
most strategic plans just add, right? You don't really see a strategic plan out there that says, hey, strategically, we think it's great for the school to let go of X and Y and Z. Well, from the marketing perspective, I get it. That's not really the most exciting thing, but it's actually maybe the most strategic thing you could do. So I think the problem with strategic planning is that we want to add and add and add and not make the hard, sometimes less popular decisions to sunset, to scale back. But there's nothing more strategic than doing that. It sets your school up for success if you do it right.
Yeah. Well, I want to take a second. I want to break down why that's an easy trap to fall into, especially, in September of 2025, when there is quite a bit of uncertainty. I mean, look, let's just call a spade a spade. 15 years ago, the competitive landscape for independent schools was fairly well defined. It was their competitor independent schools and it was the public schools. Fast forward to today, 2025, it's not just that anymore. In fact, now it's homeschool, online school, micro school, charter schools. Just the proliferation of options for families means we're literally in the era of school choice for families. And you've got a wide spectrum of costs associated with it, with charter and public being free, all the way up to, independent schools, which tend to be at the most expensive end of the spectrum. So what does the school have to do? Well, oh my gosh, the suburban public school here has every program we have. They've got a LEED certified building. They've got turf fields. They've got all the things. They look a lot like our campuses. So what do? Well, we have to lean into things that are signature, right? And we have to add more programs and we have to, create separation and differentiation with those competitors. The problem, you and I have talked about this, the problem is a lot of these programs typically aren't additive to revenue.
Yes.
You're not charged
more than one.
Right? You're not charging more for these things more often than not. And maybe they have a material impact on enrollment, but maybe they don't. Maybe it's, negligible. And so, but you have to staff these things and you have to invest in these things. And so our operating costs just continue to go up. And what I hear you saying and what I firmly agree is a strategic plan should look at that. And it should look at, okay, we're not against adding, but we also can't keep adding without thinking about what we're going to subtract. And, I've got this really simple spreadsheet that I've created for members of my community where you can go through your different programs and different things and look at it across 3 columns. How much revenue are these things generating? How much do they cost to run and operate? And then what is the mission to impact? And what is the impact to mission? And you may have a program that it makes no money, zero money, and it's very expensive to administer, but it is off the charts with impact to mission. That's probably core to who you are. That is a huge part of your values, a huge part of your mission. That is bedrock stuff for your school.
Yeah.
But then you may have a program that zero, low revenue, high expense, and minimal impact to mission. My recommendation is you've got to circle that, pull it out of the list, and have conversations about, does it make sense for us to continue to do this? And I think that is such an important component of strategy. I'm glad you mentioned it because it's clearly it's one of the opportunities in front of us that sometimes we miss.
I think you're spot on. And I was reading something not too long ago. I think it might have been from XBlow, and it was analyzing or asking various questions about the viability of certain revenue generating opportunities that a school might explore. And I think in particular, it was about auxiliary type of revenue. But one of the main points in there was we actually undercalculate and underestimate the total cost to the school associated with a new program or a new initiative. And part of that is structural in the way that schools do their accounting.
Well, I read that. This was a great piece that they put. I remember reading.
Yeah, I think it was more Kelly.
It was more. Yeah, it's an amazing. I think it was a LinkedIn post, if I'm not mistaken.
I think so. Yeah, I know it definitely bounced around, but that's what struck me, is because here's this written piece. I wish I had wrote it.
Yeah, me too.
Nuts and bolts of school accounting, but it was translated in a way. The punchline really was, the way we account for stuff in schools doesn't really capture the time, the energy, the overhead, the staffing hours to make something happen.
Yeah.
So when you think that your program is net positive and revenue positive, it might actually be a wash, and you might actually be a little bit in the red. And so those kind of conversations have to happen at the strategic planning level, because the things you're considering in your strategic plan are likely 10 times the order of magnitude of any one auxiliary program that you might run. So you have got to think critically about how much revenue is this going to bring to the school? What would it cost? And if it is a cost with no financial return, let's make sure that it is a really worthwhile cultural or mission-oriented project. And I think the thing that is hard to hear for schools is that so many of these things that we are adding are really just about keeping up and not necessarily getting ahead. It's very reactionary to the marketplace. The addition of a new facility, the addition of a new program, that is not to get ahead of the competition necessarily. Sometimes it is to just stay in the race and stay even with the competition. And so that's why I think schools feel a lot of heartburn sometimes. They add and add and add, but they don't necessarily feel like it's getting them miles ahead of the competition like they would have hoped, because everybody is running this same race, which is why clarity about who you are in the marketplace. Hey, we are not the school that does X, Y, and Z, so therefore we're not going to have the facilities for it. That's a bolder, more courageous choice to make that might distinguish you in the marketplace better than adding all of these facilities. And I don't think that's something that schools really are comfortable considering.
Yeah. And look, I always like, this is a good moment for me to put this reminder into the pod, which is like, we think that these problems are unique to independent schools. But like, if we flew the plane a little higher and started looking down across other industries, you're going to see some similar things as well. Like there's this desire to be competitive. There's this desire to stand out in the market, which means we have to do more, we have to do more, we have to do more. And, that's not always the case. Sometimes, when you're very precise with what you do and the offerings that you make available, like you can start to see separation, but it's hard. Like human nature, I don't know, I'm not wired. I mean, I've had to really work on that to be able to rewire my brain to think in that way.
You're spot on. And we are oriented as school people to want to do everything we can for the people that we serve, so our students and our families.
Absolutely.
Of course, the default is, how can we find a way to add this thing that will benefit this child? And everything is rooted in the right place. It's coming from the right place. But again, school leaders becoming more savvy on the business side need to start to be part of the conversations about the costs and the investments required to do X or Y or Z program. And so I just feel very strongly when schools are saying, okay, we're about to launch a strategic plan, that they really sit down and think about how it's going to come to life in a financially sustainable way. And that hopefully will unearth opportunities more than it will unearth any roadblocks or challenges.
So one of the things that I'm hearing here is that we have to build accountability in, right? Like that's just a big part of successful teams, successful boards. And so I guess the question for you is, regarding everything that we just talked about, like how can boards and school leaders hold themselves accountable for linking strategy to finance?
I think about one of the schools I'm working with right now, where I'm serving as their interim advancement director for the year, about to launch a strategic plan. It's been privately approved, and here we go. We're about to launch it publicly. The head is extremely committed to documenting all of the incremental wins throughout the year, when the faculty, the staff, the administration go out and begin to actually make the strategic plan come to life. On the one hand, culturally, it's a great thing to remind your people to do, but it also creates really robust documentation that begins to justify why we put these things in the plan. So from the administrative side of the house, myself, the CFO, others, we are being required by our head to document the financial implications, not just of the whole pillar of the plan, but of all the individual steps we're taking throughout the year to begin to make it come to life. That way he can analyze trends and say, wow, okay, this is actually pretty easy for my team to implement, and it's allowing us to grow revenue pretty easily. Or this is harder than I thought it was going to be. My team is running into financial headwinds, trying to find creative ways to make this pillar of the plan happen. Maybe this wasn't as realistic as we thought it was.
Right.
And I thought in year one of a plan, it's a smart, easily implementable thing to do. And I think it's going to pay off in the long run for him.
Right. Well, it's a couple things there. One, you're prioritizing, you're validating, and you're determining, is the juice worth the squeeze? Right? Like all that effort, are you going to get enough of a return so that it's impactful to not just school, but it's today, but it's long-term vision. I'm curious, if a school leader wanted to run a quick finance audit of their current plan, and I think you're kind of starting to lead into this with this last question. I'm going to build on that here. In your mind, what would that look like if they wanted to do that audit?
Well, I think what you suggested a moment ago is where I would start, right? So take each strategic bullet and ask yourself a few questions. What would it conceivably cost? Think about that holistically. Facilities, overhead, people, other sort of miscellaneous staffing costs. Then where will those dollars come from? Is this a minimal enough investment where you can phase it in to your operating plan? Can you move some monies around? Can you maybe take a previous commitment that you've been making to transferring money to savings, to your Prism account, whatever? Can you take a little bit of that out and make an investment here without changing your operating budget? Or do you need to fundraise for it out of thin air? Is it money, just net new money that you've got to go and try to raise? The third thing then is over what timeline? Because a lot of things look unachievable on a 1-year timeline, but over a 3-year timeline, you can probably find a creative way to make it happen. Yeah. And so when you think back to the language that is in your plan, are you binding yourself to a really short timeline to make something happen? Is your strategic plan pillar or goal underneath it promising something realistic, but over-promising on the timeline in which it can be delivered? So those three things: what will it cost, and where in the budget it will be, and then over what timeline can you make this happen? If you can succinctly answer those three things, I think you're well on your way to beginning to see if something is viable or not. And then from there, ask yourself, if this is something, it can be as simple as green light, yellow light, red light. Green light would be, all right, we think that this thing is actually already pretty resourced. We can move our existing resources around. Our analysis told us that. That's a pretty good indicator that you could probably go try to make this happen. Yellow, we partially got the money for it, but we partially need to do some fundraising. So then let's pause. It's going to take a minute. How do we do that? Is it a campaign? Do we find a couple major gift opportunities? And then red is, this plan is great. This idea is great. This goal is great, but God, it's the amount of money it would require would just zap the advancement team of its ability to do anything else. We got to run an annual fund. We got to do a gala, all these things that we can't afford to stop doing. I don't think it takes a lot of time, but what it does take is the buy-in from your advancement person, your head, your CFO, and at least one key member of your board that has that financial sophistication. That group of 3 or 4 people can go a pretty long way in analyzing the effectiveness and the viability of your plan.
What strikes me here is like you've got the makings of a book. I feel like we're kind of breaking out an outline of what a strategic planning finance book could look like. So I'm gonna put you on the spot here. If you could, if we were literally writing it right now, what would that first chapter look like?
Oh man. Oh, good question. It would not be anything nuts and bolts. The first chapter of that book would be aspirational. It would remind people that money is not, I'm going to literally repeat the thing I said when I was on here last time. it is not scary to go and talk about the fact that schools need really significant investments from people in its community to make stuff happen. It's okay. It's okay that we have to do that because what we're offering is exceptional, or at least we aspire for it to be exceptional. And so we have got to get people comfortable with going and exploring funding pathways for these things. But in order to do that, we have to remind them of the significance of the work that they're doing and that there are few things more worthwhile shouting from the rooftops to ask for financial support for than something that an independent school is doing for young people. And so when I try to have conversations with schools, I don't, they often are like, for a fundraising consultant, you often really take a long time to talk about money. And I'm like, great, then I'm doing my job, because money is the scary stuff. And when I start talking about that, people immediately, they shut off their brains. They don't want to go there. So let's start earlier. Let's just remind people that the work you are doing, I say this to any school leader listening, it's extraordinary stuff. And we deserve to go out and confidently and joyfully ask people to support it. And so when you go through your strategic planning process, yes, I want you to think about the financial viability of all of this stuff, but don't be ashamed to do that. And so that's what I think, that whether it's chapter 1 or the prologue or whatever, I think that's the most important message for people.
I love it. Mattingly Messina, last question for you. If somebody wants to reach out, how can they get a hold of you?
You can find me on LinkedIn and you can email me. My email is mattingly@findthroughline.com. I would love to talk with any school leader. It's selfishly for me, it's wonderful. I get to learn whatever challenges you might be facing. Peter and I will see each other in Seattle at KSNACE, at NAIS early next year in January, February. Maybe we'll find a way to get some people together at those conferences. So I would love to chat with any of your listeners. Moonshot's been pretty good to me, so I'm happy to give back in return.
Yeah, and I will say that Mattingly is part of the Moonshot Lab Advisors. So if you're listening to this, you're a member of Moonshot Lab, reach out to him, DM him through the community, send him an email. Like, he's ready. He's here to support you. Mattingly Messina, founder of Throughline. Thank you so much. As always, this was just a great conversation.
Thanks, my friend. We'll do it next time again.